All right, so before we get into this, a quick distinction. Food loss is going to be anything that happens before we get to the consumer, and food waste is going to be anything that happens after we get to the consumer. Altogether, these both come to food loss and waste, which as a whole is what we'll be looking at today. Food loss accounts for approximately 14% of total food production, while food waste accounts for about 17%. One way to think of this is that 31% of the food that we produce goes to waste, is trash, goes bad. Fairly inefficient. So it would make sense that we would want to reduce this number. Now, this 31% counts for about 527 calories per person daily. And if you're vegan, you could also think of this as one Mediterranean veggie sandwich without the feta cheese. From a greenhouse gas perspective, let's look a little at the numbers here. For total food system emissions, the food loss and waste accounts for about 24%. And if we look at the total emissions, our total greenhouse gas emissions, food loss and waste accounts for about 6%. However, it looks like there's variability in the data. A 2023 study indicated that the percentage could be closer to about half of total food system emissions. Yet, even this doesn't give us a full picture because we're only quantifying one planetary boundary. We still have to consider things like water use, land use, air pollution, ocean acidification, land toxicity, and there's a bunch of other factors. You can actually go to my Recipe 2016 video and see the 18 different factors that are accounted for in the recipe framework. So logically, it would seem that reducing food loss and waste would be a no-brainer. The purpose of the study that we'll be looking at today was to model the economic effects of reducing food loss and waste to give us a better prediction of what that impact could look like. They find that because of a tendency in consumer behavior known as the rebound effect, we actually may not get the complete gain in environmental impact reduction that we thought we would. So let's try to visualize this a little bit better. If we're looking at our demand curve here, we end up getting it shifted to the right because of the food that's been wasted. Then for our supply curve, it gets shifted to the left because of our food that's been lost. So we have this new equilibrium that's been set up, and if we're going to, let's say, completely reduce food loss and food wasted, we're going to get these curves shifting back to where they originally were. So that means our demand curve will shift back to the left, and our supply curve will shift to the right. So we have our supply curve shifting to the right, and our demand shifting to the left. And that's where the new equilibrium will be formed. Now, to what extent these curves shift will determine where that new equilibrium is. Based on the model that they used in this study, they found that the equilibrium is going to be at a greater quantity. And again, this increase is what's known as the rebound effect. Studies of the rebound effect in the energy industry found that increasing the efficiency could result in a 5 to 10% rebound. We would think of that as a 5 to 10% reduction in the expected environmental benefits. The study that we're looking at today, their model is showing a rebound effect at 53 to 71% of a loss of benefit. Just to clarify, the orange would be considering the rebound effect. And you can see that, like I said before, with the energy industry, we're getting about a 5 to 10% reduction, whereas here we're looking at somewhere around 60% reduction based on the model in the paper that we're looking at. So this raises the question, is it even worth it to try reducing food loss and waste?
Yeah, absolutely. There's many assumptions that go into modeling, and I love the phrase that says all models are wrong, some are just very useful.
Mhm.
And I personally think that this model is quite useful because of its simplicity. We capture a phenomenon that nobody else has thought about at this scale, right? At this like global level, and I think talk about it in a way that just adds nuance to the discussion of food system sustainability. And I think in a good way, right? In a way that's forcing us to think more about the consequences of large scale shifts in food systems.
As mentioned in a review of this study by economist Mark Bellemere, if the goal is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, we could probably find a better way to do that than by tackling food waste. However, another consideration is that this study also found that by reducing food loss and waste, there are benefits beyond just environmental, in this case for food security, and this could range anywhere from 100 calories today in the West to over 300 calories in more food insecure regions like sub-Saharan Africa. Now, it's unlikely many of us that were involved in food system policy or that we have the financial power to make large scale changes. So, what's the point of reviewing all this?
We are seeing a growing interest, right, in sustainability overall, whether that's food or energy or climate. And consumers are, they want to know and they want to make decisions that reflect their ethics, right? And their morals. And that's why some people become vegan. That's why some people only eat locally, right? And so to me, maybe this paper is just one part of a larger discussion around food loss and waste. But I think it still highlights the importance of reducing this, whether you are a consumer at home, right, trying to do more meal prepping, which is a great way to avoid food waste at home, or you work for a business that is a food like company or a restaurant or whatever, that reducing food loss and waste is important for food security. I think this paper really highlights that. And yes, like, do we also find that the environmental impacts are sort of lessened by rebound effects? Sure, but that doesn't mean they go away.
Some would consider
Mhm.
exorbitant food consumption, even if it's not necessarily
Right.
being wasted, it's per se, but just excess food consumption, but beyond a certain caloric limit as
Mhm.
waste. And I thought that was an interesting point, and certainly something that very difficult to quantify, probably.
Totally. It's really hard. And you have cultural
Yeah.
differences too. Like one great example we found, we were looking at food system transformations in other countries, and food loss and waste was one of the focus areas of this. And in the United Arab Emirates, right, there's this idea around having a lot of food at meals because it shows like wealth, it shows hospitality, even if that not everybody's going to eat that food. If you have an empty table, that looks bad, right? Culturally. So you're fighting things that are also ingrained, right? And for good reason in some cases. Those types of things are, like you said, quite interesting and also very hard to measure. I think again, it goes back to consuming or having a diet that you feel like reflects the things that are important to you. And yeah, like maybe you like someone reducing their food waste at home by 1 pound a month or whatever isn't going to do much in the grand scheme of all the food that gets lost and wasted worldwide. But if that person, values being, frugal or values making sure that they're conscious with their money or all these kinds of things, that is reflected in that choice also.
Thanks for watching today. I hope I've given you more background on the complexity of this topic about food loss and waste. I want to give a big shout out to Margaret for agreeing to sit down with me, taking her time to explain things, and also giving her insight on this issue. I also want to give a big shout out to my dad for making me the frugal person that I am today. If you have any questions or thoughts, feel free to leave them in the comment section below. My Patreon is somewhere around in the description if you want to help support. And as always, I hope that you find time to think of yourself less this week.
And the thing is, like, there's always this balance between individual responsibility and like collective responsibility. And what that balance is exactly, I don't know. If you find out or someone does, they'll win the Nobel Prize.